As part of the PRISM program, BT spoke with Chantelle Darby, currently VP of Communications for the global venture capital firm Accel. Chantelle has a wealth of experience, starting her career on the agency side before leading Yelp through an IPO and working with Sheryl Sandberg on the international side of her book, Lean In. This conversation covers Chantelle's experiences throughout her career and her crucial insights for students and young professionals who are starting out in the industry. So with that, I'll hand it over to BT, talking with Chantelle Darby.
So Chantelle Darby, you've had a super career, and we can't wait to hear more about it. So would you share a little bit your professional journey with us?
Totally. I started my career on the agency side. So I initially started with a firm called Alexander Ogilvy. I'm actually not sure if they're still around. I know Ogilvy still is. I'm not so sure about Alexander Ogilvy. I started right as the bubble was starting to burst in the Bay Area. So it was about 2003. And it was a really interesting time, as you can imagine. I was fresh out of college. And when I joined the firm, I joined as in an internship. And so really kind of a song and a prayer and fingers crossed that would translate into a full-time job. And fortunately it did. But as kind of the months progressed, we went from, there were dozens of people in the office. By the time I left, I think there was maybe like 6 or 7 of us. So it was a very surreal experience, but it also meant that I was given a lot more responsibility as a young age, and probably more than I actually should have had. But it was kind of really trial by fire. And then I left Ogilvy and joined Byte. And BT doesn't remember this, but I did remind him when I was interviewing, BT didn't want to hire me. I'm sure I was a terrible interviewer. It was probably only like a year after my professional job. But look at me now. Look at us now. And I joined Byte, and that was a really fundamental point in my career. It was a really, really special agency, and Byte is now called Archetype, but at the time it was a European firm. It had come from London, and they had just launched in San Francisco. And the tech world was starting to pick back up again. And so it was actually a very exciting time to be in tech PR. And I really credit with the people I met at Byte as having just a massive impact on my career and who I am as a person today. And BT is absolutely one of them, but there's a number of folks that, BT knows as well, like Sarah Jane and Kate and Sean Mills, and just really special people that have done a lot for me along the way. And then, of course, as part of that, I also really strengthened the foundation of what comms is. And so we had AMD, which is a chip company. We also, I think, had Sun Microsystems as well when that was still in existence. Applied Materials, which is a semiconductor company. So I primarily worked on the semiconductor side, which is now back in vogue. But at the time, it wasn't exactly the sexiest clients to have. But it actually, just the business of chips, the nature of chips, gave me a really institutional knowledge of how technology works, which was awesome. And so I was based in San Francisco, and then had the opportunity to transfer to New York when we opened an office in New York. I was there for a little while, and it was also fantastic getting to launch an office and be a part of that crew. And then I got the opportunity to join Yelp. And I feel like Yelp is pretty well known these days. At the time, it had just launched. And so it was really only well known in San Francisco. But as someone who had just moved to New York and was getting to know the city, I was very familiar with it. And it was an opportunity to be the second comms person. The New York and East Coast specifically was a really critical area for the company. And so they really wanted to have someone come and establish their presence there. And that happened pretty quickly. And with the nature of startups, I had the opportunity to wear many hats. So once we rolled out on the East Coast, we started doing other cities as well. We eventually expanded internationally, and I got to do our international rollout, which was amazing. I also got to do a lot of the data-driven storytelling at Yelp, which is a huge part of their program today. But when we started, it was not at all. And a kind of side funny story I can share is one of our product manager and I at the time, I was desperate to do this data storytelling because we had such cool stuff. And we decided, it was Valentine's coming up, and we decided to do which is the most romantic city on Yelp. And there's this whole formula that we did to make sure it was completely balanced, because if we did on sheer reviews, it would all obviously be San Francisco or be New York, one of our bigger cities. Anyhow, long story short, it was Tacoma, Washington. Super random, but that's just what it was. We created a blog post, we pushed it out, and it went viral. we didn't tell the CEO at the time because it was like this podunk little blog post. And I just remember Jeremy Stoppelman, the CEO, G-chatting me because Slack didn't exist, saying, I hope this data is right, which it was. But that was a really fun point in time, and I think really underscored the importance of data storytelling. Fast forward, went through the IPO, which was incredible. It was such a cool part to help take a company public. I stayed with Yelp for probably about a year after going public as well. And at that point in time, I was ready to go and try something new, and I didn't exactly know what that was yet. And I was still based in New York at the time. Again, kind of don't need to get into it, but my then boyfriend, now husband, so it worked out. He was in San Francisco, and I wanted to get back to the West Coast and figure out if this was a real thing or not. So I decided to consult. It was super scary to hang my own shingle. I was really fortunate. My first 2 clients were Sheryl Sandberg to help do the international portion of Lean In, which at the time it was that book, that premise, that TED speech, it was life-changing, especially for a woman like me. So to be a part of that was just, it was amazing. And then Greylock Partners was also a client. I thought I was going to consult for 6 months, and it ended up being 6 years. I really loved it. I primarily focused on early stage startups, so helping to launch and tell their stories. I had a few bigger clients that I would work with as well, but I really loved and still do working with early stage startups. And so 6 years in, I was doing when my main clients had come off, and I was doing the whole dog and pony show to different VC firms just to see if they had, any other clients. I was meeting with my friend Larry Yu, who is the then marketing partner at Accel. And he was, he said, I don't have anyone, but I'm hiring. Would you be interested? And I was like, no, I'm good. And that night I went home and I was like, well, wait a minute. This actually seems like a really cool opportunity to keep on doing what I love about consulting, which is working with early stage startups, but being able to put roots down somewhere and like really be with a team, which is something I had missed consulting. So I think I emailed him that night. I was like, if you haven't filled the position, he was like, no, I definitely haven't. And we actually lucked out because I still had clients. So I still needed to fill my contracts to them. So we did kind of a try before you buy, and to see if we were right fit for each other. And obviously we were, and 7 years on, here I am.
Wow, quite a story. And especially the beginning of it, trip down memory lane for
I
me.
know.
Right? I remember the horrible layoffs at the time when every agency shrank from way over 100 people to the 6 or 7 survivors that
Yeah.
you were one of. I've
Yeah.
been there, right? One of the most painful thing ever. You bring people in with all the enthusiasm of trying to give them a great career, and then things go horribly wrong. So that was rough. And despite the fact that maybe my initial judgment wasn't the best, I still to this day take credit for having hired one of the best people I'd ever had. So
I wonder what it was. I wish I could remember.
I don't either. And nobody listened to me, which was the right decision, obviously. So Accel is an iconic venture firm. Would you maybe mention some of the household name investments that that Accel over the decades have helped
Sure.
with the IPO and to become world famous?
Yeah, so Accel's a 43-year-old venture capital firm founded by Jim Swartz and Arthur Patterson, who are still, I'm very blessed to be able to get to spend time with both of them. They're not active investors at Accel anymore, but they're definitely an active presence and 2 very remarkable people. We're also a global venture capital firm. And so we invest globally, but we have offices here in the Bay Area and then London and Bangalore, India. We're probably best known for doing the initial check into Facebook. We were also the first check into companies like Slack, more or less a household name in the professional workplace. We were early investor in CrowdStrike, which is an amazing security company. Spotify, probably going to do more of the consumer ones because I feel like that's what's maybe a bit more well known here. UiPath is a massive enterprise SaaS company based out of Romania. So there's just a number of investments that we've made that are pretty well known.
So venture capital firms, you and I have been around them for a long time, but many of our students have not. They're sort of a unique species within the world of business. Would you kind of give us a quick 101 on VCs, how they operate?
I guess in essence, it's a VC firm is really just where investor, so like a VC firm, buys a stake in your company is really kind of the short answer to it. But what that means for the company is they get capital to be able to grow their business, get off the ground, hire. Oftentimes, especially in the case of Accel, you're also going to have kind of a partner that's going to, run alongside you and help you as you scale your company, where they can give you, thoughts or advice on hiring, ops, marketing. But that's kind of how a VC firm works in essence. And it starts at, we do all stages of growth all stages of investing, I should say, which means we will write the very first check, not oftentimes, but sometimes if you just have an idea or, a PowerPoint or whatever it might be, we'll still invest in you if we believe in you as a founder and the idea. But we also do every stage of growth as well. So seed is often the earliest check. Then you have things like you'll hear Series A, Series B, Series C, and then on to, eventually when a company has a public event, so an IPO or an M&A.
So your career has already spanned all these different types of PR in organizations such as agencies, in-house, consulting, and now VC comms. What are some of the differences and maybe some of the commonalities in these different types of assignments?
I was thinking about that when you and I were talking last week, and it is kind of wild that I've been fortunate enough to kind of be able to try all these various roles at different places. For me, agency side was really foundational. I got to learn from so many different people. I got to learn kind of the building blocks of what great client service looks like. Really kind of foundational work, which, isn't always the most fun, like building briefing books or doing research or whatnot, but I think it shapes your perspective on how to approach things moving forward. I personally would probably never work on the agency side again, and that's mainly because I love being in-house, whether that's at a company or at a VC firm. It's just a fit that's been better for me, but I'm so grateful for those initial years and would actively encourage people, I think, early on in their career to consider it too. In-house, I think, again, is something I would also encourage people to try if they can. It's a different beast. And I had a really hard transition when I went from agency side to in-house. And that was mainly because you go from somewhere where everyone's speaking your language to where you have to do a tremendous amount of education on what comms is and isn't and why it's valuable. That was definitely a transition period, but I think it's good when you have to be forced to recognize that not everyone understands what you're talking about or how comms works. And so, how are you an effective partner? How are you an effective advocate? You really learn that when you make that transition. And consulting was fantastic. And we can unpack this now or later on in the conversation. When I started consulting, there were not a lot of consultants. And I'm not sure how familiar people are with the landscape right now, but there's a tremendous amount of consultants. And I actually think that's great. And we can talk a little bit about that. But at the time, it was me and a small handful of other people. And I really liked it because the way my model worked is essentially I was kind of like a drop-in VP of comms. And so I love that. I think the hard thing for me, which is why I eventually transitioned back in-house per se, was I really miss being with a team and I really miss being a decision maker. And I was super lucky where I had clients, that really valued me and we enjoyed being around each other and they'd invite me to Christmas parties and all that. But at the end of the day, you don't have a seat at the table. I wanted a seat at the table. So that transition then into VC comms worked really well for me because I still got to do all the things I loved, consulting and working with startups, and same thing of being, kind of still having kind of that in-house perspective as well. But I get to do it at Accel. And I will touch a little on too, I think VC comms is a really unique role. Again, there's not a lot of us out there, and each firm tends to approach marketing differently. And no way is right or wrong. It's just, how that firm prefers to do things. And so I often find people are very curious about VC comms. And I think there's a tendency to romanticize the role. And don't get me wrong, I love it. I absolutely love what I do, but it can be a really hard gig. And there's a tremendous amount of context shifting. Often you don't report into one person. So oftentimes comms will report into CMO or CEO. I say, I have 11 CEOs, which is 11 partners, because, all of them are important. All of their companies are important. And even though maybe there's a fire drill or something going on with like this partner's companies or whatever it might be, like doesn't mean those are any less important. So there's a tremendous amount of context shifting, which again, I enjoy and I thrive under that, but I think it's not for everyone.
You started off by talking about and I wrote it down, the foundational nature of working at an agency, and that you were very glad that you made that decision early in your career. And I'm glad you're saying that, because our students ask us faculty frequently, well, what's the best way to build a great career? And I always say, by default, start at an agency, because you get these foundational skills, right? And then you may decide agency is for you and you'll stay, or you may decide it's not, or you bounce around. So, right. So that obviously worked well for you. And I would assume when you started your first agency gig, you probably didn't see yourself as a global VP at one of the world's most important VC firms.
I actually don't know what I saw myself as, but it wasn't that, that's for sure. But no, I mean, I really credit Byte specifically with so much of what I've learned, but also so much of who I met. It made me really sad. There were some, there's some articles on it during COVID, but it made me so sad for people, both of course at school, but also starting out in their careers and not being able to have that experience with the opportunity of like working with people face to face. Because I think those hallway conversations, those beers you grab after work, those really tough moments, those relationships are so critical. And those are people who also will carry you on throughout your career as well, if you're lucky. And it made me really sad to think that not everyone got that experience in those first few years during COVID. But for me, it was definitely transformational.
Yeah, I definitely hear you. I feel the same way about my agency past. It was both tough and very sweet, and typically at the same time. So it's kind of these two souls in your mind kind of talking to each other, for sure. Maybe let's drill down a little bit more on your work at Accel. Maybe you want to share with us a little bit the breadth and the depth of your responsibility. So you work for your 11 bosses, the general partners, and you probably also work a lot with the portfolio firms. So what does that all look like?
Yeah. I mean, like I said earlier, every VC firm is different and how they approach marketing. And again, no one way is right or wrong. At Accel, we take a little bit of a more conservative point of view with marketing, specifically for the firm. And so you won't often see an Accel partner as a talking head somewhere or opining on various trends. And that's really by design. Our team primarily wants the focus to be on our portfolio companies. And, they'll do, of course, our team will do interviews and whatnot. They really largely prefer the focus to be on our companies and what they're doing. But that's not to say there isn't a lot of work happening in the background or a lot of relationship building happening in the background. We do a tremendous amount of background and off the record meetings with press. Again, those are primarily in support of our portfolio companies, but getting to know reporters, understanding what they're interested in covering, where we can be helpful as a sounding board, or where we can be helpful in connecting them to, interesting people in and out of our portfolio, I think is an incredibly important investment to make, and one our team is super happy to do. My team will also support our portfolio companies. So we don't do what I call actual execution for them. So we're not like on the front lines, pitching funding news or whatever, product launches or whatever it might be, mainly because we're like we have a bigger marketing team, but my comms team is a team too. And that's just absolutely not sustainable for us to be able to do something like that. But I also think it's really important for folks to, kind of roll up their sleeves and do it themselves as well and build those types of relationships. But that's not to say that we aren't available at all times. So we're often like one of the first meetings after we've made an investment in the company, helping that company think through their funding announcement or the launch of their company, if they've been stealth or whatever that might be. We introduce them to great agencies or consultants, or if they're at a later stage, we may suggest that they want to hire someone in-house, and we can also help do that. I was recently on the interview panel for one of our other companies who's hiring their first head of comms. And if there's ever, if someone's trying to get TechCrunch and they just can't land TechCrunch and we have a relationship there, we'll always make that relationship. But we're not, writing press releases or pitching reporters specifically on their news. And then I say every day is different. Every hour is different, where it will go from, supporting a partner on something to hopping on the phone with the portfolio company. We recently invested a lot more on the content side of things. So more on own media, which I think we'll probably talk a little bit about more. But that's been a tremendous focus for our team as of late on doing more content, specifically a podcast as well.
What do you like best about your job?
I like the storytelling aspect. I love meeting all these different people doing such incredible things. I love chatting with them and helping them think through like, what is the nugget? What is the kernel that makes you super interesting? I kind of love connecting the dots. And so, I'm super relationship driven. I love meeting people across the board. And so, being able to say like, oh, you should talk to so-and-so, whether it's a reporter or someone they might want to hire or whatever it might be. That's what I love. And I get to do it quite a bit in the role I am in VC.
So venture capital still, and I looked at the numbers just recently, still is a very male-dominated world, right? And it seems to be changing rather slowly. What impact does that have on you and your work?
Yeah, it's what like one of those things where I think everyone across the board can and should be doing better. For our part, I think things as simple as recognizing there should be diversity and, every either internal or external event that we do and really investing in that. They're small changes, but they make a difference, when people see themselves represented, on panels or at events. And, we're also investing at the foundational level in universities as well. We have something called the Accel Foundation, which I'm part of the steering committee on. It provides scholarships to underrepresented minorities across a number of colleges across the US. And so, I think it absolutely makes an impact on my job. And, in my role, I'm trying to kind of help chip away at that change as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier the proverbial seat at the table that you clearly have at Accel. What does it take for a communicator to earn the credibility of senior corporate executives and allow them to allow you to advise them?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it is like honesty. And then I think also, I don't know if humility is the right word, but I think just having folks understand that you have their back and their best interests at heart goes a really long way. I'm trying to think of specific examples, but if you're working in your role, and I'm sure a lot of folks here are or will be, but you're working with senior executives, you're working with CEOs. Some of them, it's their first time ever leading a company. They either could be super young and also recently out of college, or it could be their first time starting a company, and it's really scary and it's really lonely. And I think for whatever reason, oftentimes the role of the comms person, I think they become a confidant as well. And so I think, understanding where that person's coming from, pushing them when they need to be pushed, but understand when you need to pull back, and earning that trust is really like what it comes down to. I also think just putting the work in, like that sounds really simple, but you'd be surprised how many people don't do any research on a reporter, don't take a step back and think through what are our goals with this product announcement. Is this publication, we sell to the C-suite, like, should we really be in TechCrunch, whereas something like Wall Street Journal would be better? I think oftentimes people are trying to move so quickly, sometimes they don't think about like, what is the end goal? What does success look like? And so I think you'd be surprised that sometimes the basics get missed.
Interesting. So our world of PR in the broadest sense, or marketing, I don't even know anymore where the boundaries are, not that I ever did, is changing rapidly. 10, 15 years ago, your job would have been very media relations heavy, and I'm sure it still is. You have mentioned several times throughout this conversation media relations already, but you also refer to owned content. So what has changed? What do you see there?
Oh man, I feel like I mean you can probably Google all sorts of opinions on all of this, but
I
I
want
really
yours.
what?
I want yours.
Okay, I know. But I really feel like the landscape has dramatically changed, since I first started. Whereas I think previously, I mean, I even feel like I remember at Byte, people would have like a media relations specialist title. And I really think those days are gone where you can just be so siloed into one vertical. And I don't mean that just for media relations. I mean that, for really anything that falls under the comms or marketing bucket. Everyone talks about Marcom and whatnot, but I think that blend, like you have to have that blend now. You have to have an understanding of all the different verticals and how they fit together, and of course lean into what makes the most sense for you and your company or your clients or whomever you support. For some that might just be social, that might be going purely direct. For others it might be more on the own side of things, where you're doing blog posts or podcast or video or whatever it might be. And then for others it sure is, maybe it's more heavier on the media side. But I just think the world's changed so much where, the proliferation of social media and especially like TikTok and Instagram Reels, like that's a whole new world that I find so fascinating. And then, sadly, the media landscape is constricting, and that's really impacted folks' beats and their bandwidth for covering things. Again, like when I started out, at least, folks had very specific beats where it's like, here's the chip reporter, here is, the Facebook reporter. And now it's like the Facebook, chip, AI, enterprise SaaS, all under one person. And so it makes it a lot more competitive to place stories, I think, especially if you're a smaller startup. And then, reporters don't often have as much time, but also as much detail as they did, historically on a company. So it's just everything's changed so much. And so I really think you have to be approaching comms like from like a multifaceted approach.
Couldn't agree more. When we, in our PR programs, including Prism, we always tell everybody that we define PR in the broadest possible way, not in the narrow sense that shaped early my career and even the beginning of your career, very much exclusively journalism driven. So we really define it as anywhere around the peso model, anywhere, any type of outreach to your target audiences. So that
Yeah.
very much mirrors what you're saying. How does Accel navigate potential communication challenges or crises? And what strategies are in place to maintain trust and credibility during such times? A generic example without giving away anything you can't.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think crisis is one of those things where, and there's a saying, which I'm probably going to butcher it, but you always want to be prepared for it. And so we've actually invested quite a bit in like a crisis preparedness plan. And, that's just kind of giving us a framework for, if something happens, who's the task force? Who are we going to work with on that? What are our principles? Which I think is also something that's a really good exercise for folks to like invest in or do is, what do you stand for? If something happens and it conflicts with one of those principles, how are you going to respond if you are going to respond? And so I think, we actually did this exercise recently, and going through that is really critical because it gives you so much clarity. And on a big global organization like Accel, where if something happens in the US, it's not isolated to the US, it's going to impact our teams in India and London as well, and vice versa. And so it's really critical for us to be all on the same page so you can move quickly in a crisis, but also be ensured that everything maps back to your principles. So
Right.
hopefully I answer that question.
Yeah, it does. And I really like the notion of having a somewhat formalized crisis prep process in place, because so many organizations don't. And
Yeah.
right? To this, it strikes me as impossible that companies don't think ahead, right?
I know, but I think crises are also one of those things where like, unfortunately, sometimes you have to go through them to realize that, and trust me, I have, and I know how you have as well. And I think sometimes you have to go through it to realize like, how important it is to invest in crises plans, but then also like to think ahead of, I've been through them at Yelp, I've been through them at various other companies I've consulted for as well. And everyone's moving quickly, things can happen, and it's good to have a regular check-in and just see like, is there anything that like, if something happened, like this could turn into a crisis or not, and just having kind of those regular check-ins.
Another question from our students, and this is a great one. What advice would you give to someone starting out in public relations? So this is obviously very dear to our students, and some of them already have worked in different industries for a few years.
Yeah. Is this, maybe I can just interpret it. Is this for someone looking to like get hired or someone who's just started out in their career?
This audience really touches on both. So
Okay.
free to comment on both.
Okay. So if you're looking to break into comms and you're looking to get, a role somewhere and you're searching, again, I like BT your advice earlier, like working on the agency side was transformational for me. As you're thinking about reaching out to folks, I know often like the knee jerk is like, hey, do you want to grab coffee or would you hop on a Zoom? And I understand like the thinking behind that. I personally think a better way to approach it is you can make that ask, but it's maybe giving something back in return. And what I mean by that is maybe there's a platform or a channel or something that super well. I'll use myself as an example. I'm not on TikTok, and mainly because it's like crack cocaine to me. But for example, maybe you are, and there's like a really awesome, influencer who does a ton of tech stuff. For you to maybe send that over and be like, hey, I just want to quickly introduce myself. Like, I'm super interested in breaking into VC comms. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but there's this amazing tech influencer I thought could be really cool to be on your radar for like Accel for your portfolio company. Just something like that I think shows that you understand the business. And then it also has maybe some creative thinking of saying like, I see Accel's not on TikTok. Maybe they should be. So I was just thinking more about like how I would approach it these days, because I'm sure it's very different than like me being on Craigslist, 20 odd years ago. And then again, breaking into comms, or once you have the job, how to be helpful. Again, I think it's just putting in the work and asking questions. Like, there's no better time in your career than when you're first starting out. And I think this goes at any stage, but to ask questions and say, I don't know, and use that as an opportunity to really learn is how I would think about it too. And I mean, I think also just like always raising your hand to help goes a really long way.
Interesting. Always raising your hand, both in terms of, yes, I'm available to do the job, even if it's after hours, but also I'm here and have an opinion and would like to contribute.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, everyone's different. Like, I really love, again, like I love the creative side. I love trying to think outside the box. And it doesn't always mean that you can or should do it, right? Like, I strongly believe in everything you do should be marching towards the end goal. But, I think putting the work in, and then if you have like ideas, share them too.
And I like what you said earlier. If somebody wants to network for a job, bring something to the table, do your homework and add value rather than just ask. That's really
Yeah, I think actually doing like a really thoughtful email versus kind of, spraying and praying, like that always tends to work out better.
I'll come to my last question, which was inspired by you when we spoke last week. You made a reference to, quote, showing up in a post-COVID world as a concept that you discuss a lot with your peers. Great. Bring it to life for us, please.
Yeah. I was just reflecting on it last week because I think maybe something had happened. It's really felt like, I think folks, and life happens, everyone's super busy, certainly, but it's felt like there's been a little bit of a disconnect now that we're like squarely back in the workplace. And what I mean by that is I think oftentimes people almost still have like kind of the pandemic mindset of, I'm going to RSVP something, but I'm not going to show up. And I've just noticed that a lot more. And I think there's so much power in following through with what you commit to. And again, life happens, things happen, but trust me, it makes an impact when you don't do it and people remember. And so if you say you're going to commit to something, whether that's an event, whether that's calling someone on the phone, whether that's returning an email, whether that's something doing, you have a job to do, a task to do at work, I think people should try as hard as they can to commit and show up to that. It's just something I've kind of routinely noticed more and more. And people remember when you do, and people remember when you don't.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And people will always remember. We operate, or you operate in a global economy, but still the world of PR is kind of confined, and we continue to run into each other. And once you've made a friend, you've made a friend. But there's also the other way, right? So you need to follow through with stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, I am in such a fortunate position. I work at a great company. I work with amazing portfolio companies. And as much as I can, I really try and pay it forward. Because I don't know where I'm going to be. And, hopefully I'm still Accel. I don't know where I'm going to be. And so, sometimes, especially right now, it's a harder economy. It's a harder job market. And really smart, incredible people, unfortunately have been laid off or are looking for jobs. And I just try as hard as I can to pay it forward. And that's kind of my mentality, whether you're just starting off or, you have a really seasoned career. I'm always happy to be, a sounding board or introduce you and connect you to my network. So I think what I mean about showing up too.
Great words to finish this conversation with. Chantelle, thank you, and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
That's it for this week's episode of PR Future. Major thanks to Chantelle and BT for arranging this conversation. For more similar discussions, make sure to follow PR Future on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you stream your favorite shows. This episode was produced by Marshall Winfield. Executive producer is Ron Antonette. And I'm your host, Fred Cook, and this has been PR Future. Thanks for listening.